She was left in a clapboard shack in the middle of the countryside with 3 small children and not a red cent in her pocket. Can you imagine waking up on an ordinary morning to discover that the man you shared 8 years of your life with simply vanished, taking everything you had? But this story actually happened in June of 1958, in the rural backwoods of Georgia. And what happened next will make you believe that nothing in this life happens by chance. Before we continue this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button down below, because the ending is going to surprise you in a way you never imagined. What this woman built in that wooden house changed not only her destiny and that of her children, but of an entire community. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching this story from. I love knowing where these narratives end up. The morning of June 12, 1958, broke with a strange silence in the wooden house nestled in the farmland, 3 miles from the village of St. Peter's Creek. Helen Carter woke up with the sun already high, beaming through the cracks in the ill-fitted boards. Her body took a few seconds to register what was wrong. It wasn't the silence itself, because the children were still sleeping in the next room. It was the absence. The absence of the smell of coffee that Augustus always brewed before heading out to the fields. The absence of the creak of his boots on the wooden floorboards. The absence of the warmth of another body in the bed. Helen got up slowly, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She was 29 years old, but that morning she felt as if she had aged decades overnight. Her dark brown hair fell loose over her shoulders, and the simple blue gingham dress she hurriedly put on had patches on the elbows. She walked to the small kitchen. The table was empty. The wood-burning stove was cold. No sign that anyone had woken up before her. That was when her stomach tied itself into tight knots. Helen ran to the room she shared with Augustus, threw open the rough wooden wardrobe. His clothes weren't there. No shirts, no trousers, no boots. Her heart began to beat out of rhythm. She pulled out the drawer where they kept the money, those $370 they had saved over 2 years of hard labor. The drawer was empty, completely empty. Her legs gave way, and Helen had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. No, she thought, it can't be. She ran to the small chest in the corner of the room, where she kept the few pieces of jewelry she owned, her mother's inheritance. She opened it with trembling hands. Empty. He had taken everything, absolutely everything. It was at that moment that Thomas appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes with small fists. The boy was 7 years old, skinny, with the same brown eyes as his mother. "Mama, where's Daddy?" he asked, his voice still raspy with sleep. Helen felt her throat close up as if invisible hands were squeezing it. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know how to tell that little boy that his father had left, that he had abandoned them. "Your father went out early to work," she lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come on, let's have breakfast." But when she opened the pantry tin, she realized there was only half a sack of cornmeal, a handful of dried beans, and a small jar of molasses. Nothing else. Augustus had taken or sold everything else. The twins, Claire and Laurie, woke up shortly after. 2 identical 4-year-old girls with light brown hair and rosy cheeks. They ran into the kitchen laughing, playing with each other, oblivious to the disaster that had befallen the family. Helen had to turn her face away to hide the tears that insisted on welling up. She made a thin porridge with cornmeal and water, sweetened with a bit of molasses. The children ate in silence, sensing that something was different, though they didn't know exactly what. After the children went out to play in the yard, Helen finally allowed despair to take over. She sat on the edge of the bed and wept. She cried with muffled sobs, her whole body shaking, with a hollowness in her chest that felt like a bottomless pit. How could he do this? How could he simply walk away, leaving 3 small children with nothing? Helen had married Augustus Carter when she was 21. He was a foreman at a nearby farm, a hard-working man, or at least that's what she thought. They lived first in a small tenant house on the property of the landowner where Augustus worked. Thomas was born a year after the wedding. The twins came 3 years later. Life wasn't plentiful, but it wasn't miserable either. They had food on the table, clean clothes, a roof over their heads. 2 years ago, Augustus had managed to lease that small property of 20 acres. A simple wooden house, fields of corn and sweet potatoes, some chickens, a dairy cow. His dream was to save enough to buy the land, to stop depending on a boss. Helen believed in that dream. She worked hard alongside him, tending the garden, raising the chickens, making cheese to sell in the village. They saved every red cent. But in recent months Augustus had changed. He came home late smelling of moonshine whiskey. He got irritated over nothing. He stopped talking. Helen had realized something was wrong, but she never imagined he would simply run away and taking everything, like a thief in the night. The sun was already high when Helen finally stood up. She needed to think. She needed to act. She couldn't afford the luxury of being paralyzed by despair. She had 3 mouths to feed. She washed her face with cold water from the bucket, pinned her hair into a tight bun, and took 3 deep breaths. "You will find a way," she said to herself in a low voice. "You need to find a way." The first thing she did was an inventory of what she had. Half a sack of rice, beans for maybe 3 days, the molasses. In the garden, there were some pumpkins, cassava, and collard greens. The 6 chickens were still laying eggs. The cow, Bessie, gave milk. She had firewood for the stove. It wasn't much, but they wouldn't starve to death in the next few days. The problem was what would come after. Helen grabbed a cloth bundle and placed inside 2 ceramic pots that were quite pretty, a pair of embroidered linens she had received as a wedding gift, and a brass candlestick that had belonged to her grandmother. They were the only valuable things left. She called Thomas, told him they needed to go to the village. The boy looked at her with those sharp eyes, asked where his father was again. Helen crouched in front of him, held his small shoulders. "Your father had to travel," she lied again. "It will take him a while to come back, so now you're the man of the house, okay? I need you to be strong and look after your sisters." Thomas nodded seriously, puffing out his thin chest, as if that responsibility had made him grow 3 inches. "I'll take care of them, Mama." Helen felt her heart squeeze with pride and sadness at the same time. The walk to St. Peter's Creek was almost an hour on foot. The red dirt road wound through pastures fenced with barbed wire and small patches of pine woods. The June sun beat down hard, and Helen felt sweat running down her back. She carried the heavy bundle in one arm and held Laurie's hand with the other. Thomas walked ahead, carrying Claire on his back, the girl laughing and playing piggyback. St. Peter's Creek was a small village, no more than 200 souls. It had the St. Mary of Grace Catholic Church in the center of the square. Mr. Virgil's general store, Joe's repair shop, the priest's house, about 20 scattered houses, and nothing else. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew everyone's business. Helen entered the general store with her heart pounding. Mr. Virgil was a short, broad man with a grey moustache and small eyes that always seemed suspicious. He was behind the counter adding up numbers in a ledger. He looked up when Helen entered, and his expression changed subtly. "Mrs. Carter," he said with a rough voice. "What brings you here?" Helen placed the bundle on the counter, opened it to show the pots, the linens, the candlestick. "Mr. Virgil, I came to see if you have any interest in buying these things, or trading for groceries. I need flour, beans, sugar, some dried beef if possible." The merchant looked at the items with the air of someone who knows the exact value of everything. He picked up one of the pots, turned it over, examined it. Picked up the candlestick, tapped it with his fingernail. "Where is Augustus?" he asked without taking his eyes off the objects. "He went to work," Helen replied too quickly. "I'm handling the shopping today." Mr. Virgil finally looked at her. The silence that followed was too heavy. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be straight with you because I don't like beating around the bush. Augustus was here the day before yesterday. He took groceries on credit, said he'd pay next week. Except I heard this morning that he was seen last night catching the bus to Atlanta with a woman who wasn't you." The world spun. Helen had to lean on the counter to keep from swaying. The children were outside playing with a stray dog. Thank God they heard nothing. "How much does he owe?" she asked, her voice coming out thin as a thread. $170. It was almost half of what they had saved, of what Augustus had stolen from her. Helen felt a rage burn in her chest, but along with the rage came icy despair. If Mr. Virgil already knew, the whole village already knew. Everyone was already talking. The abandoned woman, the poor thing, the one who couldn't keep her husband. "I don't have that money right now," she said softly, "but I will pay. I swear I will pay." Mr. Virgil sighed deeply, ran a hand over his mustache. "Look, Mrs. Carter, I'm a merchant. I'm not a bank. I can't keep giving credit to everyone or I'll go bust. You know I've always paid everything on time," Helen argued, her voice trembling. "I never owed a penny. This is my husband's debt, not mine." "But you are married to him. The debt belongs to the family." Helen took a deep breath, trying to control the trembling in her entire body. "All right. How much are these things here worth?" Mr. Virgil examined them again, did mental calculations. "I'll give you $80 for everything." It was little, very little, but she had no choice. "And the groceries I need?" The merchant wrote in the ledger. "I'll give the groceries you asked for. I'll deduct the $80 from the debt. You still owe $90. You have 2 months to pay. 2 months, 60 days to come up with $90, no husband, no job, with 3 small children." Helen nodded because there was no other option. "All right, Mr. Virgil prepared a sack with cornmeal, beans, some brown sugar, salt, and 3 small pieces of dried beef. It wasn't much, but it would last 2 weeks if she rationed it well. Helen took the heavy sack, called the children. The walk back home was much harder than the way there, not because of the weight of the sack, but because of the weight on her soul. When they arrived home, the sun was already setting. Helen prepared rice and beans and a small piece of the dried beef sautéed with garlic and onions from the garden. The children ate with appetite. Thomas asked about his father again. Helen said he had traveled for work, that it would take a while. She didn't know how long she could keep up that lie. That night, after putting the 3 to sleep in the only bedroom they had, Helen sat on the wooden porch of the house. The sky was starry, full of those points of light that looked like holes in the roof of the world. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of earth and pine. Cicadas sang in the darkness. It was beautiful, but Helen couldn't feel any beauty. She could only feel fear gnawing at her insides. How was she going to get $90? How was she going to feed 3 children after the groceries ran out? How was she going to pay the lease on the land? She had no profession. She had never worked outside the home. She knew how to cook, clean, sew, tend to a garden and chickens, but that was for taking care of her own family, not for making money. The most terrifying thought of all came next. What if she couldn't do it? What if she couldn't handle it? What happened to women who couldn't support their children? The children were taken to orphanages. They were given to other families. They were scattered. Helen felt a chill down her spine. "That won't happen," she whispered to herself. "That won't happen no matter what." She was still sitting on the porch when she heard a noise coming from the road. Footsteps. Someone approaching. Helen tensed up, her heart racing. Who could it be at that hour? She stood up slowly, stood at the threshold, ready to go inside and lock the door if necessary. A figure emerged from the darkness. A woman, old, short, walking slowly with a basket hanging from her arm. When she got closer, the light from the oil lamp Helen had left lit in the kitchen illuminated her face. It was Miss Eula, the neighbor who lived a mile down the road. "Mrs. Carter," the old woman called out in a gentle voice, "may I come up?" "Yes, you may, Miss Eula. Forgive the hour." The old woman climbed the 3 wooden steps of the porch. She was a small, thin woman with completely white hair tied in a bun, her face wrinkled by the sun and time, but her blue eyes were still lively and attentive. She wore a simple black dress and a shawl over her shoulders. "I heard what happened," said Miss Eula bluntly. "The whole village is talking. I came to bring some things." She held out the basket. Inside were pumpkin, cassava, eggs, a tin of lard, and a chicken already plucked and cleaned. Helen felt the tears coming again, but this time they were different. "Miss Eula, I can't accept this. You hardly know me." "I know enough," replied the old woman. "I know you are the mother of 3 small children. I know you were left here alone with nothing. And I know you didn't deserve this. No one does." She pushed the basket into Helen's hands. "Take it. It's not charity. It's neighborliness. It's what decent folks do." Helen held the basket, and the lump in her throat undid itself. Tears ran hot down her face. "Thank you so much, Miss Eula. You don't know how much this means." The old woman gave a small, sad smile. "I do know. I went through something similar a long time ago. My husband died, leaving me alone with a small daughter. It was hard. But God doesn't abandon those who have faith and a willingness to work. You'll see." Miss Eula turned to leave, but looked at Helen one more time. "If you need anything at all, just send the boy to my house. I'll help however I can." And then she went down the steps and disappeared into the darkness of the night, the same way she had arrived. Helen stood there holding that basket, looking at the food as if it were gold. It wasn't much, but it was enough for another week, and more important than the food was what that gesture represented. Someone cared. Someone had reached out a hand. In the midst of that desert of loneliness and shame, a small light had shone. She went inside, put the food in the pantry, blew out the lamp, and went to bed. She slept better that night than she had the previous one, because for the first time since waking up to discover the abandonment, she felt a tiny little thing that looked like hope. The following days were of hard labor. Helen woke up before sunrise, milked Bessie the cow, collected eggs from the hens, lit the wood stove, prepared coffee with milk and corn cake for the children. Then she worked in the garden, weeding, watering, harvesting. She washed clothes in the tub, hanging them on the wire line. She mended the children's torn clothes, prepared lunch, tended the chickens, cleaned the house, made dinner, put the children to bed, and fell into bed exhausted, her body aching, her hands full of calluses. Thomas helped however he could. He fetched firewood from the woods, took the cow to pasture, looked after his sisters while his mother worked. The boy had matured overnight, as if he understood that now everything depended on him too. Helen watched her son working and felt her chest tighten. That wasn't a life for a 7-year-old child, but there was no choice. 2 weeks later on Sunday, Helen dressed the children in the best clothes they had and walked to the village for the 10 o'clock mass. She needed to show her face, prove that she wasn't hiding in shame. The St. Mary of Grace Church was small, with whitewashed walls and a dark tile roof. The wooden pews creaked when people sat down. Helen entered with her 3 children, feeling every gaze turned toward her. She heard the whispers, the muffled gossip, but she kept her head held high. She sat in a pew at the back, Thomas by her side, the twins on her lap. Father Lawrence, a man in his 40s, thin, with round glasses and a serene voice, conducted the Mass. He preached about charity and compassion, about helping one's neighbor, about not judging. Did anyone there understand that he was speaking directly about her? Helen didn't know. But when the Mass ended and everyone began to leave, Father Lawrence called her over. Mrs. Carter, can you wait a moment? The other parishioners left casting curious glances. When the church was empty, the priest came down from the altar and walked over to her. I wanted to know how you were doing, he said with genuine kindness. I'm getting by, Father. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his cassock, a gesture to buy time before speaking. I heard what happened. I want you to know that the church doors are always open to you and your children, and if you need help, just ask. Thank you, Father. But I'll manage on my own. I'm sure you will, he agreed. But sometimes God puts people in our path precisely to help us manage. It's no shame to accept an outstretched hand. He paused. In fact, Mrs. Margaret Sterling, Mr. Anthony Sterling's wife, sought me out last week. She needs someone to make fine sweets for a party she's throwing next month. I thought of you. Helen blinked in surprise. Me? But I've never made sweets to sell, Father. But do you know how to make them? Yes, my grandmother taught me when I was a girl. She made crystallized fruit sweets, preserves, coconut fudge, divinity candy. Then you know how to make them. Father Lawrence smiled. Mrs. Margaret pays well. It could be a good opportunity. Do you want me to speak to her? Helen felt her heart race. An opportunity to earn money, real money. Yes, please, Father. Thank you very much. Then it's settled. I'll speak to her this week and let you know. When Helen left the church with the children, the sun was high and bright. For the first time in weeks, she managed a smile. A small smile, but genuine. Maybe things could work out. Maybe there was a way. On the afternoon of that Sunday, while the children played in the yard, Helen went to the small orchard behind the house. There were 3 muscadine grapevines loaded with ripe fruit, 2 peach trees, a fig tree. She picked the muscadines, the dark purple juice staining her fingers. She picked fragrant peaches, took them to the kitchen, washed them, started making preserves. She needed to practice. She needed to remember exactly how her grandmother taught her. The sweet smell of boiling preserves filled the house. Thomas came into the kitchen, drawn by the aroma. What is it, Mama? It's candy, my son. I'm making muscadine preserves. The boy looked at the pot bubbling on the stove, his eyes shining. Can I taste it? When it cools down, I promise. And then, when the preserves were ready, Helen tasted them. The flavor exploded in her mouth, sweet and intense, with that slightly tart touch of the fruit. It was perfect, exactly as she remembered her grandmother's sweets. She stored the preserves in a glass jar, sealed it tight. Tomorrow she would take a sample to Mrs. Margaret. God willing, this would be the beginning of something new. That night, after putting the children to bed, Helen knelt beside her bed. It had been a long time since she had truly prayed, but now the words came from the bottom of her chest. Lord, I know that sometimes we get lost along the way. I know I failed at something to deserve what is happening. But I ask you, by the love you have, do not let my children pay for my mistakes. Give me strength to care for them. Show me the way. I am lost, Lord, but I trust that you will not abandon me. The tears flowed silently. But when Helen stood up, something had changed inside her. The pain was still there, the fear too, but along with them, there was determination, an iron will to prove that she could do it, that she wouldn't be destroyed by this, that she would be stronger. The next few days brought more surprises. On Tuesday, when Helen went to fetch water from the well, she found a sack of cassava flour leaning against the door. No note, no name. Someone had left it there during the night. On Thursday, it was a large wheel of cheese wrapped in banana leaves. On Friday, a live chicken, tied by a rope on its leg, pecking in the yard. Helen didn't know who was leaving those things, but she knew they were gifts from heaven. Someone or several people were helping in secret, without wanting recognition, just helping because it was the right thing to do. The following Saturday, Father Lawrence appeared at the house riding a black mule. He brought a message. Mrs. Margaret wanted to see Helen on Monday morning. Helen barely slept on Sunday night from anxiety. On Monday, she woke up while it was still dark, took a cold bath in the wooden washroom behind the house, put on her least patched dress, pinned up her hair with care, took the jar of muscadine preserves, asked Thomas to watch his sisters, promised to be back before lunch, and walked toward the village as the sun rose, dyeing the sky orange and pink. Mrs. Margaret and Mr. Anthony Sterling's house was in the best spot in St. Peter's Creek, a large brick construction with a wide veranda and a well-kept garden. Helen knocked on the iron gate with her heart racing. A maid came to answer, asked her to wait. Minutes later, Mrs. Margaret appeared. She was a woman of about 50, grey hair pinned in an elegant style, wearing a dress of fine fabric, a pearl necklace around her neck. She had that air of someone who had always had money, but her eyes were kind. "Come in, my dear," she said in a polite voice. Helen was led to a living room with beautiful furniture, lace curtains, a wall clock that ticked solemnly. "Sit down." Mrs. Margaret sat in an upholstered armchair, and Helen sat on the edge of another, nervous. "Father Lawrence told me about you," the woman began. "He said you know how to make fine sweets." "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother taught me. I brought a sample." Helen held out the jar of preserves. Mrs. Margaret opened it, smelled it, took a small spoon and tasted it. Her eyes widened slightly. "My dear, this is delicious. Where did you learn to make it like this?" "With my grandmother, God rest her soul. She made sweets for farm parties when I was a girl. She taught me all the secrets." Mrs. Margaret tasted it once more, savouring slowly. "Look, I'm going to throw a party to celebrate my silver wedding anniversary with my husband. It will be on July 15th. About 100 people are coming. I need assorted sweets, preserves, crystallized fruit, coconut fudge, divinity candy, pralines, everything looking beautiful. Can you do it?" Helen took a deep breath. "Yes, I can, ma'am, but I'll need to buy the ingredients. Sugar, eggs, fruit." "I will provide everything," Mrs. Margaret interrupted. "You make a list of what you need, and I'll arrange it. And I'll pay $200 for the work." $200. Helen had to repeat it mentally to make sure she heard right. It was more money than she had seen together in her entire life. Enough to pay the debt at the general store. Enough to buy groceries for months. Enough to buy new clothes for the children. Enough to breathe. "Do you accept?" asked Mrs. Margaret, seeing the look of shock on Helen's face. "Yes, I accept, ma'am," she replied, her voice choked up. "Thank you very much. You don't know how much this means to me." "I imagine I do." Mrs. Margaret smiled kindly. "Then it's settled. You make the list, stop by here on Wednesday, and I'll have everything ready. And any questions, just send word." When Helen left that house, the sun was shining like never before. Her feet barely touched the ground. She ran down the dirt road back home, her heart so light it felt like it would fly. She arrived panting, sweaty, but smiling from ear to ear. Thomas came running, scared. "What happened, Mama?" "Is something wrong?" Helen picked up her son, spun him around, laughing. "Yes, something happened, my son. A miracle happened. We're going to be okay. We're going to make it." And in that moment, hugging her son with the twins running to join the hug, Helen knew it was true. God was watching. God had always been watching, and he hadn't abandoned her. The days that followed were of work like Helen had never worked before. She woke up when the furthest neighbor's rooster crowed the first time, still dark, and was already in the kitchen lighting the wood stove. The list of ingredients Mrs. Margaret provided was generous. 20 pounds of refined sugar, 4 dozen eggs, fresh and crystallized fruits, dried coconut, coconut milk, vanilla extract, cloves, cinnamon. Things Helen hadn't seen gathered together since her grandmother's time. She transformed the small kitchen into a sort of candy workshop. She separated the pots by size, organized the ingredients on makeshift shelves, scrubbed everything until it shone. Thomas helped by cracking the coconuts in the backyard. The twins scraped the white meat with small spoons, thinking it was the most fun game in the world. The whole house smelled of caramelized sugar, cinnamon and vanilla. It was the smell of hope. Helen started with the coconut fudge. She mixed the grated coconut with sugar and coconut milk, took it to the fire, stirring constantly until the right point, that exact moment when the mixture pulls away from the pot. She spooned it onto a board greased with butter, shaped perfect little balls. They turned out golden, shiny with that texture that melts in your mouth. She tasted one. Perfect. Then came the divinity and spun sugar. This was the hardest recipe, requiring patience and a delicate hand. She separated the whites, beat them until stiff, prepared the sugar syrup to the hardball stage, and then, carefully pouring the syrup over the whites while beating, she created the fluffy, cloud-like candy. For decoration, she used a tin funnel her grandmother had left her to drip fine threads of golden sugar syrup, creating nests that looked like spun gold. Thomas stood watching, open-mouthed. "It looks like princess hair, Mama," he said, enchanted. Helen smiled, the first real smile since Augustus had left. "It really does, son. And you know what else? This princess hair is going to buy food for us for a long time." She worked like this for 8 days straight, waking up early, working late, her arms aching from stirring heavy pots, her hands stained with sugar and fruit juice. She made peach preserves that turned out translucent and glowing like amber. She made pumpkin sweets with coconut that turned out golden yellow and fragrant. She made pralines that melted on the tongue. She made crystallized fruits that looked like edible jewels. Ms. Eula appeared on Wednesday bringing more eggs and asking if she needed help. Helen accepted gratefully. The old woman had experienced hands, knew the right point for every sweet, knew the tricks so the syrup wouldn't crystallize, so the coconut wouldn't get rubbery. They worked side by side, talking softly while the pots bubbled on the stove. Ms. Eula said she had lost her only daughter when the girl was 20 to a fever the doctors couldn't cure, that she had been alone since then, her husband having died years before. That loneliness was a deep hole from which it sometimes seemed impossible to climb out, but that she had learned that helping others was the best way to give meaning to empty days. Helen listened, and for the first time understood that she wasn't alone in suffering, that other people had also lost, had also cried, had also thought they wouldn't be able to go on. And they went on, they continued, they survived. On July 14th, the eve of the party, Helen and Miss Eula finished the last sweets. The kitchen table was covered with platters, jars, trays, everything carefully arranged and covered with clean cloths. There were more than 200 pieces, each one made with care, with love, with the urgent need for everything to be perfect. Helen barely slept that night. She lay staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the crickets singing outside, praying softly that Mrs. Margaret would like them, that the guests would approve, that this was really the beginning of something new and not just a fleeting illusion. Early in the morning, Mr. Virgil appeared with the wagon to pick up the sweets. Mrs. Margaret had sent word that he would handle the transport. The merchant entered the house, looked at the quantity of platters and trays, and for the first time Helen saw something resembling respect in those small, suspicious eyes. "Did you make all this alone?" he asked. "Me and Miss Eula," Helen replied. The man nodded, helped load everything carefully so as not to spoil any piece. When he finished, he looked at Helen. "Mrs. Carter, about that debt. Let it be for now. You pay when you can." Helen felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, Mr. Virgil. I will pay, you can be sure, but I appreciate the understanding." He gave a nod and left with the wagon rattling down the dirt road. Helen stood in the doorway, the morning wind stirring her loose hair, feeling something strange growing in her chest. It wasn't just relief, It was dignity, the feeling that she had value, that she was capable. Mrs. Margaret's party was on Saturday night. Helen wasn't invited, but on Sunday morning, very early, Mrs. Margaret herself appeared at the wooden house. She came in a buggy pulled by a bay horse, holding the reins herself, a rare thing for a woman of that standing. Helen went out to meet her, heart racing. "My dear," said Mrs. Margaret, stepping down from the buggy with a broad smile on her face. "I came to thank you personally. The sweets were the hit of the party. Everyone asked who made them. I've never seen so many people praising food before. You have an exceptional talent." Helen felt her cheeks heat up. "I'm happy they liked them, Mrs. Margaret." "Liked" is an understatement. The woman opened her purse, pulled out an envelope. "Here are the $200 agreed upon." She held it out, but before Helen took it, she added, "And another $100 as a bonus, because it was worth every penny. $300 in total." Helen looked at the envelope as if she were seeing a miracle. $300. It was more money than she had held in her hand in her entire life. "Mrs. Margaret, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just keep making these wonderful sweets, because I already have 3 friends wanting to order for their parties. Are you willing?" "Yes, I am, ma'am. More than willing." Mrs. Margaret smiled, climbed back into the buggy. "Then I'll send people to find you. Take care of yourself, my dear, and congratulations on the work." With a click of the reins, she left, leaving a cloud of red dust on the road. Helen went inside, sat on the edge of the bed, opened the envelope. The bills were there, smelling of fresh paper. She counted twice to be sure. $300. Enough to pay the entire debt at the store. Enough to buy groceries for 6 months. Enough to buy fabric and make new clothes for the children. Enough to buy shoes. Enough to live. She cried again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. Thomas came into the room, saw his mother crying, got worried. "Mama, why are you crying? Did something bad happen?" Helen pulled her son into a tight hug. "No, my love. Something good happened, very good. We're going to be okay now. You'll see." On Monday, Helen went to the general store with the money. Mr. Virgil was at the counter as always. She placed $170 on the counter. "I came to pay the debt, Mr. Virgil, all of it." The man counted the bills, noted it in the ledger, drew a line through her name. "Debt paid in full, Mrs. Carter, and I can say it gladdens me to see you turning things around. Thank you, Mr. Virgil, for the patience too." She took the opportunity to buy groceries, paying cash. Flour, beans, rice, sugar, coffee, salt, oil, dried beef, spices. She filled 2 sacks. The merchant helped carry them to the door. "Mrs. Carter, if you want, I can sell your sweets here in the store too. I'm sure the folks in the village will buy them." Helen looked at him surprised. "Would you really sell them?" "Yes, I would. On consignment. You bring them, I sell them, we split the profit." That was how it started. Helen began making sweets 3 times a week. Coconut fudge, spun sugar nests, preserves, divinity. Mr. Virgil sold everything quickly. People came from distant farms just to buy Mrs. Carter's sweets. The money started coming in, not much, but constant, enough. Weeks passed. July turned to August. August turned to September. Helen worked ceaselessly, but now it was work with a purpose, with a future. Orders for parties kept coming through Mrs. Margaret and her friends, christenings, weddings, birthdays. Helen made everything with the same care, and her fame grew. In mid-September, 3 months after the abandonment, Helen was in the garden harvesting pumpkins when she heard the sound of horses on the road. She raised her head, shielded her eyes from the sun with her hand. 2 men were dismounting in front of the house. She didn't know them. She tensed up. Something about their manner didn't seem right. They were tall, broad, in traveling clothes, dusty from the road. They walked to where she was with heavy steps. "Are you Helen Carter?" asked the older one. "Yes, I am. Who are you, gentlemen?" We are Augustus's brothers, Gerald and Anthony Carter." The one who spoke was fat, sweaty, with small eyes and a rough voice. The other was thinner, nervous, moving his hands constantly. Helen felt her stomach freeze. Augustus's brothers. She didn't even know they existed. Augustus never spoke of his family. "What do you want here?" "We came for news of our brother," said Gerald. "It's been 3 months since anyone's heard from him. Do you know where he is?" "I don't. He left in June. Left me here with nothing and disappeared." The two men exchanged glances. Anthony, the thin one, scratched his head. "We heard he ran off with a woman to Atlanta. Is that true?" "That's what I was told," Helen replied dryly. "But I'm not sure of anything. I just know he took all the money we had and left me with 3 small children to raise." Gerald frowned. "And this land here, is it yours?" "It's leased. My husband paid the owner." "Lie," Gerald blurted out suddenly. "This land belonged to our father. When he died, he left it as inheritance to Augustus. He never leased anything. This property is his, and if he disappeared, it goes back to the family, to us." Helen felt the ground slip from under her feet. What did he mean? Augustus had said it was a lease, always said so. "He doesn't own anything," she insisted, but her voice came out unsteady. "Yes, he does." Anthony pulled a crumpled paper from his shirt pocket. "It's here. Deed registered at the courthouse. 20 acres registered in the name of Augustus Carter, inherited from his father, our father, in 1953. Helen took the paper with trembling hands. It was true. It was there, with the courthouse seal, signatures, everything. Augustus was the owner. He had lied to her for 2 years. Made her believe they were struggling to buy something that was already theirs. Rage exploded in her chest like fire. He lied about everything. "That's right," agreed Gerald with a crooked smile. "Our brother was always a liar. But that changes nothing. The land belongs to the Carter family, and since Augustus disappeared, we have a claim on it. You will have to leave." "I'm not leaving anywhere," Helen retorted, finding strength in her anger. "I live here with my 3 children. His children, your father's grandchildren. If this land belongs to the Carter family, my children are Carters too." Gerald took a step forward, menacing. "You didn't understand, Mom. We aren't asking, we are telling. In a week we come back with a sheriff's deputy, and you will have to leave, whether you want to or not." "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged," growled Anthony, but Gerald held his brother's arm. "Calm down. No need for violence. The law will settle this." He looked at Helen with contempt. "1 week, Mrs. Carter. Arrange another place to live, because this house here is no longer yours." They mounted their horses and left, leaving dust and threats in the air. Helen stood there holding that accursed paper, her whole body shaking with rage and fear. Thomas came running out of the house. He had heard everything. "Mama, are they going to take us out of here?" Helen hugged her son tightly. "No, they won't, my love. I won't let them." But when she said that, she didn't know if it was true. How was she going to stop them? She had no money for a lawyer, no knowledge of laws, nothing but the will to fight. That afternoon, as soon as she set the children to play, Helen ran to Miss Eulah's house. She told her everything, showed the paper. The old woman read carefully, adjusting her old spectacles. "This is serious, my child. If the deed is in Augustus's name and he disappeared, the brothers might really have the right to claim the land." "But my children, Miss Eulah, don't they have rights too?" "Yes, they do. But you'll need a lawyer to prove it, and lawyers cost money." "I have a little money saved," said Helen. "From the sweets I sold. Will it be enough to pay?" Miss Eulah thought for a moment. "Let's speak with Father Lawrence. He knows a lawyer in the county seat who is good and fair. Maybe he'll agree to help." They went together to the priest's house that same afternoon. Father Lawrence listened to everything, examined the document, looked serious. "This is complicated, Mrs. Carter, but not impossible. I'll send a letter today to Mr. Rudolph Rudy Sampson. He is a lawyer acquaintance of mine, an honest man. I'll ask him to come here urgently. How much does he charge, Father? I don't know, but I'll ask that it be an amount you can afford. And if it's not enough, the parish will help. You will not be left helpless. Helen returned home with a thread of hope. But that night was one of total insomnia. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of her children in the next room. What if she lost the house? What if she had to leave? Where would she go? How would she start over again? If you are enjoying this story, leave your like and share with someone who needs to believe in new beginnings. Because sometimes God tests us precisely when we think everything is getting better. 2 days later, on Thursday morning, a man arrived at the house riding a brown horse. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, with a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. "Mrs. Helen Carter?" he asked, taking off his hat. "That's me. My name is Rudy Sampson. I'm a lawyer. Father Lawrence sent me a letter. May I come in?" Helen invited him inside, offered coffee. They sat at the kitchen table. The lawyer pulled papers from his satchel, a fountain pen, started taking notes while Helen told everything from the beginning. The abandonment, the debts, the sweets, the visit from the brothers, the threat of eviction. Mr. Rudy listened attentively, asking precise questions, noting details. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "Mrs. Carter, I'll be honest with you. Legally, if Augustus Carter is the registered owner and has disappeared, his brothers can indeed file for possession, but you have 2 strong arguments in your favor." "Which ones?" "First, you are the legally wedded wife of Augustus Carter. That means you have marital rights over his assets. Second, your children are direct heirs. They have more right than the brothers. If we can prove abandonment of the home, we can ask for legal separation and division of assets. You would keep custody of the children and part of the property." Helen felt her heart accelerate. "So there is a chance." "Yes, there is. A good chance. But it will take time. Months, maybe a year. And in the meantime, we need to stop the brothers from taking possession of the land." "How?" "I'm going to file an injunction. It's an emergency request for the judge to prohibit any change in the current situation while the case proceeds. If the judge accepts, they cannot remove you from here." "And how much do you charge?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Father Lawrence asked me to charge the minimum possible. My fees would normally be $500, but for you, I'll charge $200. Half now, half when we win." Helen swallowed hard. $200. It was almost all the money she had saved, but there was no choice. "I accept, Mr. Sampson. I will pay." "Great. I'll need some documents. Marriage certificate, birth certificates of the children, this deed the brothers showed. With this, I'll build the case and file it this week." Helen ran to get the documents she kept in a tin box. Yellowed marriage certificate, birth certificates of the 3 children, all tied with a ribbon. She handed them to the lawyer along with the deed. He examined everything, put it in the satchel. "Mrs. Carter, don't worry. We will win this. Justice is on your side. Just keep working, keep taking care of your children, and leave the legal part to me." When the lawyer left, Helen sat on the porch and finally allowed the tears to come. They weren't tears of despair. They were tears of exhaustion, of tiredness from fighting alone, but at least now she had someone fighting beside her. The following week, Gerald and Anthony Carter returned. They brought a man in a suit who introduced himself as a sheriff's deputy serving papers. Helen received them at the door, arms crossed, chin up. "You gentlemen are not coming in here." Gerald smiled sarcastically. "No need to come in. We just came to officially notify you that this property is now under legal contest. You have 15 days to present a defense or vacate the premises." The officer held out a paper. Helen took it, read it. It was a judicial notice of repossession. Gerald and Anthony had filed a lawsuit to take the land. "You can leave," said Helen calmly. My lawyer has already filed the defense, and I am not leaving here. Gerald's expression changed. Lawyer? You got a lawyer? Yes, I did. Mr. Rudy Sampson from the county seat. You will hear from him shortly. The two brothers exchanged worried looks. Anthony grumbled something, but Gerald silenced him. That changes nothing, he said, trying to maintain authority. The land will still be ours. We'll see what the judge has to say about that. They left sulking. The officer lingered for a moment. In a low voice, he said to Helen, "You're right to fight, ma'am. Those two have a reputation as opportunists. They've tried to take land from other widows. Stay strong." And he left, leaving Helen more confident. The following months were of constant tension. The lawsuit dragged slowly like every lawsuit. Hearings were set and rescheduled. Documents went back and forth. Lawyer Rudy came to the house every 2 weeks to bring news, ask for signatures, explain the progress. Helen paid the remaining $100 in October, with money from the sweet orders that didn't stop coming. Meanwhile, life went on. Helen worked, made sweets, took care of the children. The wooden house no longer seemed so precarious. With the extra money, she made small repairs, replaced rotten boards with new ones, fixed the leaky roof, painted the interior walls with white lime, bought simple curtains for the windows. The house was starting to look like a real home. Ms. Euler practically lived there now. She helped in the kitchen, looked after the children when Helen needed to go to the village, told stories at night. She had found a family again, and Helen had found a substitute mother, a friend, an ally. In November, 5 months after the abandonment, something happened that no one expected. Father Lawrence appeared at the house on a Thursday afternoon with a pale and serious face. "Mrs. Carter, I need to speak with you. It's about Augustus." Helen's heart raced. "What happened?" "I received a letter from the parish priest in Atlanta. Augustus Carter died, Mrs. Carter, last week. There was a fight in a bar. He was stabbed, died before reaching the hospital." The world stopped. Helen was breathless, speechless, reactionless. Augustus dead. The father of her children. The man she once loved. The man who abandoned her, dead. She felt a wave of contradictory emotions, relief, sadness, guilt for feeling relief, anger that he died before he could explain, before he could ask for forgiveness. "The children," she whispered. "How am I going to tell the children?" Father Lawrence held her hand, calmly, with love. "They will understand in time. But, Mrs. Carter, there is something else. Augustus left a will, or rather, a notarized letter before dying. He left everything to you and the children, the property and some money he had." Helen looked at the priest without understanding. "Money? What money?" "It seems he entered into a partnership with a merchant in Atlanta. The business went well. When he died, his share was worth $5,000. It's all registered. It's yours now." $5,000, plus the land that was technically hers by marital right and the children's. Helen sat in a chair before her legs gave out. Augustus had tried to fix it. In the end, before dying, he had tried to do the right thing. That night, after the children slept, Helen went out to the porch. She looked at the starry sky, and for the first time in months, she spoke to Augustus as if he could hear. "You were a coward. You were selfish. You hurt me in a way I will never forget. But in the end, you did the right thing. Thank you for that. Rest in peace." The tears flowed silently. They weren't tears of longing. They were tears of closure, of a chapter finally ending. The news of Augustus's death reached the Carter brothers 3 days later. They appeared at the house with expressions between shocked and furious, demanding to see the will, shouting that it was fake, that Augustus was drunk when he wrote it, that it was worthless. Helen, now stronger, more secure, simply closed the door in their faces and told them to speak to the lawyer. "Mr. Rudy came the following week bringing the official documents. The will was valid, registered at the notary 3 days before the death, with witnesses. Augustus had left everything to his wife and 3 children. The property of 20 acres plus the $5,000 from the commercial partnership. The brothers could contest, and they tried, but the judge was clear. Children and wife had absolute priority over brothers in succession. In December 1958, 6 months after waking up to find herself abandoned, Helen Carter became the official owner of the land where she lived. She received the new deed, with her name registered. She held that paper and cried, not of sadness, of victory, of relief, of profound gratitude. She used the inheritance money wisely, paid the lawyer in full with a bonus for the excellent work, bought building materials to renovate the house properly, bought new clothes for the 3 children. Real leather shoes, not canvas, bought beautiful fabrics and sewed new dresses for herself. For the first time in months, she looked in the mirror and saw a dignified woman looking back. But most importantly, she invested in the sweets business, bought large copper pots, suitable for making sweets in quantity, bought more ingredients, stocked sugar, bought glass jars to store the preserves. She transformed the lean-to of the house into a kitchen dedicated solely to production. The business was growing too fast for the structure she had. The orders didn't stop coming. Mrs. Margaret and her friends spread the fame of Helen's sweets throughout the region. Wealthy farmers sent servants to fetch preserves to gift visitors. Mr. Virgil's store couldn't keep up, sold everything in a few hours. Helen needed to make 3-4 batches a week to meet the demand. It was Ms. Euler who suggested, why not teach other women? Why not share the work and the profit? Helen thought about the idea. There were 3 women in the village she knew needed money. Mrs. Francis, a widow with 2 small children. Mrs. Amelia, married to a sick man who couldn't work. And Rita, a 19-year-old girl helping her poor parents. Helen sought them out one by one. The proposal was simple. She would teach them to make the sweets, provide the ingredients, and they would split the profit proportionally to the work. All accepted without hesitation. It was the chance they were waiting for. They started in January 1959, meeting 3 times a week in the expanded kitchen of Helen's house. They worked together, talking, laughing, swapping life stories. Helen taught her grandmother secrets, the right point of the syrup, how to crystallize fruit without it getting sugary, how to make perfect divinity candy. The women learned quickly, had skilled hands, a willingness to work. Production doubled, then tripled. Mr. Virgil had to dedicate an entire section of the store just to the sweets, and even so, it wasn't enough. That was when Mrs. Margaret suggested that Helen supply to Atlanta. She knew the owner of a large confectionery in the capital who was always looking for quality artisanal sweet suppliers. Helen traveled to Atlanta in February, taking samples. It was her first time in the big city, first time seeing paved streets everywhere, cars, tall buildings. She felt small and scared, but she didn't let it show. She entered the Pearl Confectionery downtown with her head held high, presented her products to the owner, Mr. Oswald Ferris. The man was portly, with a thick moustache, the suspicious manner of someone who had seen many bad suppliers. He tasted the preserves, the coconut fudge, the divinity. His expression changed. He tasted again, more slowly, savoring. "Where did you learn to make this?" he asked. "With my grandmother," replied Helen. "Family recipes." "Well, recipes like this are worth gold." Mr. Oswald wiped his fingers on a napkin. "I'll place a test order. 200 assorted pieces a week. If they sell well, I'll increase it." "How much do you charge?" Helen did the math mentally, added up costs, labor, transport. "I charge 12 cents apiece." "Accepted. But I need regularity. Every Monday morning, delivery here. No delays." "You can count on me." They left with a contract signed right there, on the confectionery counter. Helen returned to St. Peter's Creek, feeling like she had just conquered the world. 200 pieces a week meant fixed, predictable, growing money. But it also meant more work than she and the 4 helpers could handle. She needed more people. She hired 2 more women from the village, Josephine, a 40-year-old lady with 5 children, and Marina, a 22-year-old who had been abandoned by her husband and was raising a baby alone. Now there were 7 women working together. The wooden house couldn't hold them anymore. Helen hired a carpenter, had a large wooden shed built next to the house, installed long countertops, shelves, cabinets for ingredients, bought 4 large wood stoves, transformed it into a small artisanal factory. The months flew by. January turned to February, February to March. The children grew healthy. Thomas, 8 years old now, helped on weekends, taking orders, organizing deliveries. He had a knack for numbers, good memory, responsibility beyond his age. The twins, Claire and Laurie, 5 years old, went to the little school the priest had organized in the village, learning to read, write, count. Coming home singing songs, showing drawings, happy. Helen looked at her children and saw the change. They were no longer those scared and hungry children of 6 months ago. They were children with a future, with hope, with chances. In April 1959, less than a year after the abandonment, something extraordinary happened. Mr. Oswald, from the confectionery in Atlanta, came personally to St. Peter's Creek. He wanted to make a proposal. "Mrs. Carter, your sweets are the best sellers in my confectionery. Customers ask for them constantly. I want to increase the order to 500 pieces a week, and I want exclusivity in the capital." Exclusivity meant Helen couldn't sell to other confectionaries in Atlanta, but in compensation, Mr. Oswald would pay 20% more and guarantee a fixed monthly purchase. It was an offer too good to refuse. Helen accepted. 500 pieces a week required hiring more women. Now there were 12 working in the shed. The place was always full of voices, laughter, bubbling pots, sweet smells filling the air. It had become a meeting point, a place where women found not only work, but community, friendship, purpose. Mrs. Francis managed to put her children in a better school. Mrs. Amelia paid for treatment for her sick husband, who improved significantly. Rita saved up and bought her own small house. Marina managed to support her baby and still help her parents. Each woman had her story of transformation, and they all knew they owed it to Helen. But Helen always said they owed her nothing, that she had only opened a door, and they had walked in with their own work, that the victory belonged to all of them together. The business grew so much that in June 1959, exactly 1 year after the abandonment, Helen had to formally register a company. She went to the county seat with Mr. Rudy, registered the business at the courthouse. She named it Divine Providence Sweets because it was divine providence that had saved her. That had guided her. That had lifted her up. Life was good. Better than Helen ever imagined possible on that terrible day in June the previous year. But as always happens, when things go well, envious people appear. Malicious comments began in the village, that Helen was getting rich at the expense of the poor women who worked for her, that she exploited the women, that she paid little, lies whispered by bitter mouths. Helen heard and didn't respond, but the employees themselves responded. Mrs. Francis confronted a gossip in the middle of the square saying she earned more working with Mrs. Carter than her husband earned breaking rocks. Marina said loud and clear at Mass that Helen had saved her and her son from misery. The other women joined the chorus. The gossip died quickly. In September 1959, a real threat emerged. A merchant from Atlanta, Mr. Morris, owner of a large industrial candy factory, appeared in St. Peter's Creek. He wanted to buy Helen's business, offered $5,000, money she had never seen even in dreams. "You've done a good job here," he said with a honeyed voice, "but you've reached the limit of what you can grow alone. Sell to me. I have infrastructure, machines, distributors. I can take your sweets to the entire country. And you get rich without needing to work. Helen listened to the entire proposal, thought for 3 days, gathered all the women who worked with her, told them about the offer, asked what they thought. The answer was unanimous. Don't sell. We built this together. Let's keep going together. Helen went back to the merchant and refused. I don't want to sell. I want to keep growing my own way, with my people. Mr. Morris didn't like it. You will regret this, he threatened. Small business doesn't survive when facing big competition. I'm going to open a line of artisanal sweets that will finish you. Do what you want, Helen replied calmly. But my sweets have soul. They have history. They have love. Machines don't make that. The merchant left furious, and he made good on his threat. 3 months later, he launched a line of sweets that imitated Helen's. Beautiful packaging, lower price, distribution throughout the state. Helen's sales dropped 20%. It was a moment of fear. The women were worried, but Helen didn't give up. She gathered everyone, made a speech that left a mark. Folks, we always knew it wouldn't be easy. But we have one thing they don't have: true quality. Our sweets are made with better ingredients, with care, with tradition. The customer who tastes once doesn't switch for a factory product. We just need to stand firm and keep doing the best we know how to do. And that was exactly what they did. They continued working with the same dedication, the same care, and little by little the customers came back. Because truly, whoever tasted Helen's sweets didn't accept the industrial ones. Quality spoke louder. In December 1959, 18 months after the abandonment, sales returned to normal and even grew. The company had 15 employees, produced 700 pieces a week, sold to 3 confectionaries in Atlanta and 5 stores in nearby villages. The monthly revenue was $2,000. Helen paid fair wages, gave food baskets at Christmas, helped when an employee had an emergency. The wooden house had been completely renovated. New walls, new roof, wide and firm floorboards. 3 bedrooms now, one for Helen, one for Thomas, one for the twins. Living room with sofa and armchair bought in Atlanta. Large kitchen just for the family, separate from the production shed. Indoor bathroom with a shower that worked by pulling water from an elevated tank. Luxury for the region's standards. Ms. Euler lived officially in the house now. She had her own room, looked after the children, helped with administration, was grandmother, mother, friend. She had found family again at 62 years old. If this story is touching your heart, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and share with those you love, because the best is yet to come. In 1960, 2 years after the abandonment, Helen made a bold decision. She was going to build a real factory, not a makeshift shed, but a brick construction with cement floors, with modern equipment. She bought a half-acre lot next to the property, hired a foreman, designed the project with the help of an engineer from the county seat. The construction took 4 months. When it was ready in July 1960, it was the most beautiful building in St. Peter's Creek. Exposed brick walls, large windows for ventilation, high roof with French tiles. Inside, marble countertops, porcelain sinks, gas stoves imported from the city, large refrigerators to preserve ingredients. It was a modern factory maintaining artisanal methods. The inauguration was a party that gathered the whole village. Father Lawrence blessed the place. Mrs. Margaret cut the red ribbon. Mr. Virgil gave a speech about female entrepreneurship. The 15 employees wore new white aprons and posed for a photo that appeared in the Atlanta newspaper. Helen, beside the employees, her children, Ms. Euler, looked at it all and could barely believe it. 2 years ago she was broke, abandoned without hope. Now she was a respected businesswoman, employed 20 people, owned her own home, a used car she bought for deliveries, money in the bank. But most importantly, she had dignity, she had purpose. She had proved to herself that she was capable. The following years brought more growth. In 1962, Divine Providence Sweets employed 35 women. In 1964, 50. In 1966, 70. The factory was expanded 3 times. Products reached Savannah, Birmingham, Charlotte. Helen diversified. Besides traditional sweets, she started producing jarred preserves that lasted months. Developed beautiful packaging, created labels with the company's story written on the back. Customers loved knowing they were buying products made by women who had rebuilt their lives through work. In 1968, 10 years after the abandonment, something extraordinary happened. A supermarket chain from the north contacted them wanting to distribute the products in all their stores across the state. It was the leap that would take the company to a national level. Helen accepted, but with one condition. She would maintain artisanal production, without adding chemical preservatives, without speeding up processes artificially. Quality would not be negotiated. The chain accepted. Helen's products entered the shelves of 100 supermarkets. Sales exploded. The company had to build a second factory in Atlanta to keep up. Helen hired managers, administrators, an accountant, a permanent lawyer. But she continued going to the original factory every day, talking to the employees, tasting the sweets, maintaining the standard. Thomas, now 17, was studying business administration in Atlanta. He spent weekends at home, helping his mother, learning the business. He had ambitions to expand even further, to take the family's sweets to the whole of America. Helen looked at her son and felt immense pride. She had raised a good man, hard-working, honest. The twins, Claire and Laurie, 14 years old, studied at a good boarding school in Atlanta run by nuns. They returned home on holidays, helped in the factory, but had their own dreams. Claire wanted to be a teacher. Laurie wanted to be a doctor. Helen encouraged both, told them they could be whatever they wanted, that the world was open to them. In 1970, 12 years after the abandonment, Southern Living magazine published a 6-page feature on Helen Carter, the woman who built a candy empire in the backwoods of Georgia. It had photos of the factory, the employees, the products. It told the complete story, from abandonment to prosperity. The report generated national repercussions. Other magazines asked for interviews. Radio programs called Helen to speak. She became a symbol of overcoming adversity, an example for other women. She received letters from all over the United States, women telling their own stories of struggle, asking for advice, thanking her for the inspiration. Helen answered everyone, personally, by hand. She always said the same thing: don't give up, work honestly, have faith. The rest God provides. Ms. Eula lived until 1975. She died at 77, sleeping peacefully in Helen's house, surrounded by the family she had adopted. She was mourned with honors, buried beside the daughter she had lost decades before. In her will, she left her savings to the twins, saying they were the granddaughters she never had. Helen cried as if she had lost her mother. Mr. Virgil sold the store in 1976 and retired. He lived telling anyone who would listen that knowing Helen had been the best thing that happened in his life, that she had taught him not to judge by appearances, to give a chance to those who deserve it. He died in 1980, in peace. Father Lawrence retired in 1982. He moved to a retirement home for priests in Atlanta, but visited St. Peter's Creek regularly. He said Helen was the greatest fruit of his ministry, living proof that God acts through human hands. He died in 1990 at 81 years old. Thomas assumed the presidency of the company in 1985, when Helen turned 56 and decided to partially retire. He expanded to the international market, exporting to Europe and Japan. He married Luciana, a teacher, and they had 4 children. He raised them all, teaching the values his mother taught: work, honesty, compassion. Claire became a literature teacher, taught for 30 years in public schools in Georgia. Married, had 3 children, wrote a book telling her mother's story. Laurie became a doctor, specialized in pediatrics, worked in public hospitals caring for poor children. Married, had 2 children, never charged a consultation fee to those who couldn't pay. Helen continued living on the original property. The wooden house was replaced in the 80s by a large brick home, but she insisted that the original shed be preserved. She turned it into a memorial with old photos, the first utensils, the written history of the company. She took her grandchildren there, told them how it started. On June 15th, 1998, exactly 40 years after the abandonment, the family organized a celebration. Gathered on the property more than 200 people, children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, retired former employees, old friends. There was barbecue, music, joy. Helen, at 69, hair completely white, face wrinkled but eyes still alive, climbed onto a small improvised stage, asked for silence, and spoke. 40 years ago, I woke up one morning finding that I had lost everything. My husband had run away, my money was gone, my future looked like a black hole. I had 3 small children to feed and no idea how to do it. She paused, her voice choked. I could have gave up. Could have given my children to other families and gone to work as a maid in a rich house. Many people thought I should do that. The silence was absolute. But I didn't give up. And it wasn't because I was strong. It was because I had no choice. And it was, at that hour, when I was most broken, most desperate, most alone, that God appeared. He didn't appear with thunder and lightning. He appeared with an old neighbor bringing a basket of food, with a priest offering work, with a rich lady who could have despised me but gave me a chance, with a merchant who could have crushed me but had patience. Helen looked at Thomas, at the twins, at the grandchildren. God acts through ordinary people doing good things. And I learned that we are never truly alone. There is always someone willing to extend a hand. There is always a door ready to open. We just need the courage to keep walking until we find it. There was emotional applause. Many people crying. Helen stepped down from the stage and was hugged by everyone, one by one. The party lasted until nightfall. Helen worked actively until she was 65. After that, she went to the factory only twice a week, more to talk to old employees than to actually work. She liked to walk through the factory, smell the sweets, hear the conversations, watch the women working. Each of them had their own story of overcoming. Each had found there more than a job, had found dignity. In 2005, at 76 years old, Helen suffered a stroke. She survived but became frailer, with difficulty walking, started using a cane, then a wheelchair, but her mind remained sharp, her tongue quick, her humor intact. In 2008, 50 years after the abandonment, Divine Providence Sweets was the largest producer of artisanal sweets in the South. Employed 300 people directly, another 500 indirectly, generated $20 million a year. Had factories in 3 states, exported to 12 countries. The town council of St. Peter's Creek, which had become a town of 20,000 inhabitants, inaugurated a square named Helen Carter Plaza. In the center, a bronze statue, a woman with 3 children, one hand holding a jar of sweets, the other reaching toward the sky. Below, a plaque, Helen Carter, 1929 and 2010. Example of faith, work, and perseverance. Mother of women who do not give up. Helen went to the inauguration in her wheelchair, pushed by Thomas, looked at the statue, at the plaque, at the hundreds of people who attended, smiled that small and shy smile she always had. "This is too nice for me," she whispered. "I only did what I had to do." But everyone there knew it wasn't just that. She had done much more, had changed lives, had opened paths, had proved that a woman alone, poor, without formal education, could build an empire, could win, could prosper. Helen Carter passed away on March 18, 2010, at 81 years old. Died at home, in bed, sleeping, without pain. Thomas was by her side, holding her hand. The twins arrived minutes later. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren kept arriving. The house filled with people, with crying, with hugs, with retold stories. The wake was at St. Mary of Grace Church, the same church where 40-odd years earlier she had gone to Mass, ashamed and broken. Thousands of people attended. Immense lines of former employees, customers, residents, officials, each with a story of how Helen had touched their lives. The burial was in the town cemetery, under a huge yellow oak tree. The coffin was carried by 6 women, all old former employees. Father Mark, successor to Father Lawrence, said the final prayers, speaking about how Helen had been a living example of faith in action. On the tombstone the family had engraved, Helen Carter, 1929–2010. Abandoned by man, sustained by God, mother of multitudes, and below a verse she liked. Proverbs 31:25. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. Divine Providence Sweets continues to exist. It is managed by the 3rd generation of the family, with active participation from the 4th. It still maintains the original factory in St. Peter's Creek as a symbolic headquarters. Still produces following Helen's grandmother's recipes, maintaining artisanal quality even on an industrial scale. Still employs mostly women. On the company website under Our Story, Helen's complete history is written. How she was abandoned, how she fought, how she won. Ends with a phrase she always said, God was watching everything, always was, always will be. Every year on June 12th, the anniversary of the abandonment, the company closes for an internal celebration. All female employees gather, observe a minute of silence in honor of Helen, and then share their own stories of overcoming. It is a tradition that started in 2011, a year after her death, and continues to this day. In St. Peter's Creek, the Helen Carter Plaza became a meeting point for female entrepreneurs. Every month there is a meeting there, women sharing experiences, difficulties, victories. They call it the Circle of Helens. It has helped hundreds of women open their own businesses, leave abusive relationships, rebuild lives. Helen's story was the subject of a documentary in 2015, aired on a national channel. Became a book written by Claire, her daughter, in 2018. A feature film is in development, scheduled for 2026. Her story continues inspiring, encouraging, proving that no matter how deep you fall, it is always possible to get up. Because Helen wasn't a superhero, she was an ordinary woman. But she had 3 things that made all the difference. She had faith that God was watching, she had a willingness to work hard, and she had the courage not to give up. And when you put those 3 things together, miracles happen. Wooden houses become empires, abandonment becomes a legacy, despair becomes hope, tears become joy. That is the promise Helen left, not just for her children and grandchildren, but for every woman who one day wakes up discovering she lost everything. For every person who thinks there is no way out, for every broken heart that needs to believe there will be a morning after the dark night. There will be. There always will be. Because God is watching. And when God is watching, everything can change, everything can get better, everything can become testimony that the impossible is just a matter of time and faith. And so ends the story of Helen Carter. The woman who was abandoned in a clapboard shack in the middle of the countryside with 3 small children. The woman who transformed pain into sweetness, tears into sugar, abandonment into an eternal legacy. May her story continue to inspire today, tomorrow, forever.